Во тема на денот, како што најавив, разговарам со евроамбасадорот Дејвид Гир. Welcome, Ambassador. Thank you for being with us tonight.
It's a pleasure. Can you believe it? I think one of my first interviews when I took up my mandate 4 years ago with you, Slavica, here. 4 years have gone shot past. Incredible.
Yes.
So I'm glad to be back.
Well, thank you so much. It was an honor then, and it's an honor now at the end of your mandate. You arrived here in very different circumstances in September 2020, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, when the authorities and the public, everybody was focused mainly on the protection of the public health. Now it's a completely different social constellation. How far do you think we have moved in terms of the EU reforms and the EU path during these 4 years of your mandate here?
Well, obviously, I think there have been a number of important steps forward, starting with the opening of accession negotiations in July 2022, followed by the screening process, which was very complex, very engaging. It took about a year and was completed at the end of last year. And as a result, we now have a complete analysis of all of the areas where the country needs to move forward on reforms, together with a kind of blueprint for what needs to be done. So this is a big achievement. Also, during that period, the country fully aligned with the EU's common foreign security policy, even more important in the current context of Russia's war on Ukraine. So that was a positive move. Mm-hmm. We also saw incremental steps in different sectors, whether on the environment, where we saw new legislation on plastics, or on the consequence of the producers, etc. We saw some positive incremental steps again in legislation in different sectors, from energy through to the economy. And at the same time, the country did overcome 3 major crises. One, the COVID pandemic, a lot thanks to our help as well, the energy crisis, and the economic crisis which flowed from Russia's invasion again of Ukraine. Was that enough? No, certainly not. And we would have wanted to see more, bigger steps forward. If you saw the last country report from the European Commission, in some of the key areas such as judicial reform, fight against corruption, it marked that there was no progress. So more could have been done, but we should not forget that there were some achievements as well.
Since this spring, the elections, we have a new government that has some differences when it comes to the foreign policy differences from the previous government, but the strategic interests still remain the same as they claim. However, it's a different approach to how to move forward when it comes to the EU integration, especially about the constitutional amendments. What do you think, how possible it is that the new government will manage to renegotiate the conditions, to change the framework for the negotiation process with the EU, and to make a new agreement with Bulgaria at the same time? Is this even a possibility?
First of all, on the foreign policy aspect, I think it's important to emphasize that the new government has been very clear in its support for Ukraine. That's a consistent approach with what went before. As I said, it's full alignment with the EU's common and foreign security policy and its active membership of NATO, which are very important. Yes, there may be some other shifts we will see over time. On the question of the constitution, this is an issue which dominated quite a lot of my mandate there, where there were differences with Bulgaria about how to move forward on the accession process. Those were resolved through the agreement that was reached in July 2020, and that agreement, as I always say, offers a way forward and has allowed for the opening of accession negotiation. Now, the new government has made it clear that it's not happy with that agreement and believes that it could negotiate something further. I followed the negotiations myself very closely over the period from autumn 2020 to July 22. It was a very difficult process. Compromises were made on both sides, and in my personal view, what was achieved at the end was a compromise, not perfect, but was the best that could have been achieved at that time. So I'm quite skeptical about the opportunity to go further than what was already agreed. Of course, it's open to the government to try, and it would be important that they engage with Bulgaria on this when the time is right. But as I say, I'm based on my experience, based on what was produced at the end, I'm skeptical about the opportunities there.
I'm sure you have shared your being skeptical with the new government about
we have a very
their
open relationship. Of course, we talk openly and they express their positions, we express ours. That's normal.
However, Bulgaria hasn't had a stable government for quite some time, and they are going in a process towards new elections now, so probably for a longer period of time this government in Macedonia will not be able to have a stable partner on the other side to start negotiations. Is there some kind of informal prognosis in the couloirs about how long we will be stuck in this position, in this situation that we are in now?
First of all, the question of stuck. I mean, as I said, there is already a way forward. It's a question of whether or not you take that. But if the government wants to discuss with Bulgaria, well, they're open to start that discussion at any point. And of course, yes, you're right. After elections, there will be a political authority. This will need to be discussed there. But stuck? No, because key to the EU accession process are reforms. And there's nothing stopping the government from launching on reforms. In fact, the government has a very strong majority, a majority which no government recently has had, and therefore they can move forward on the different reforms which they put into their program, and many of those which are consistent with the EU accession process. So I think now is the time to be very energetic in reforms, and of course we're having this discussion with ministers too.
Sure. I don't think I will be wrong if I state that the international community had serious concerns about the observance of the Prespa agreement with the new government, especially after the swearing in of the new president. Is this concern allayed?
I mean, I think you're right. The international community did have concerns because there is an agreement that has been reached and that has been implemented, and in accordance with basic principles of international law, this should be respected. But stepping back a bit, indeed, the Prespa agreement has delivered certain positive benefits. First of all, it allowed for this country to join NATO. It allowed North Macedonia to move forward on its EU path. But it also brought benefits in terms of trade. Trade more than doubled since the time of the Prespa agreement, trade between Greece and North Macedonia. And there were improved sectoral cooperation across the board, including in the military area. So it has brought many benefits. What we believe is that it's important that the government now looks at how to capitalize on those benefits, how to use the Prespa agreement so that the good foundation, the improvements in relations can go further. Because after all, good neighbourly relations between Greece and North Macedonia, or North Macedonia and any of its neighbours, is in everyone's interest.
So there are no worries on the EU side about how the Prespa agreement is being respected in terms of the new government and the usage of the name?
You're right to come back to that point. It's clear we believe that the Prespa agreement should be implemented in full, including the use of the constitutional name, as the agreement says, ergo omnes.
Okay. The European Union adopted the growth plan for the Western Balkans, a serious financial package that from which Macedonia might use around 800 million euros, a great fund. However, the process is conditioned by the reform agenda that we discussed previously. What are your expectations? Will the government manage to use these opportunities?
So let's look at what this really is about. It's not about putting 800 or 750 million euros on the table. What it's about is trying to address a fundamental problem, which is how do you promote growth in the Western Balkans among the partner countries? Because growth has been lagging behind the EU level. And if you want North Macedonia and other Western Balkan partners to join the European Union, it's important that the gap in standards of living is reduced. So the question is, how do we stimulate growth? And the idea was to offer these countries access to what is the real driver of growth within the European Union. That's the single market, 450 million people. So the idea, we give access to parts of the single market for this country, which it doesn't currently have. This will drive growth. But in order for this country to have the benefits and to be able to compete on a level playing field and not to represent a risk for the EU, it's important that certain reforms are put in place. And so we've developed a reform agenda in negotiation with the government, which covers a wide range of issues which are crucial to those areas where the country would have access to the single market. In addition, we say we know that quite a lot of these reforms are expensive, difficult to deliver. So we're putting on the table a large amount of money which you will receive, partly loans, partly grants, which you will receive in response to implementing reforms, and which will ultimately lead you into parts of the single market. And at the same time, we're saying you also need to sort out among you countries in the Western Balkans where you have barriers to trade, remove these barriers so that trade is flowing much better within the region itself on the basis of the same rules as the EU single market. So it's really a plan. It's what it says on the packet. It's a growth plan. It's a way to improve livelihoods. What does that mean for the average citizen? It's literally about trying to improve job opportunities, trying to improve investment. It's also trying to make sure that when people come out of school or university or are looking for jobs, they have the right skills so that their productivity is competitive with that in the European Union. So it's really about improving livelihoods. And that's something completely new. It's a great opportunity, something that we've done within the European Union itself and has worked well, and which we're now developing here in the Western Balkans.
When do you think that the whole process will start being effective?
So we're still in discussions about this reform agenda. The last government worked very well in preparing that reform agenda. This government jumped in, picked up the baton. It wasn't easy, have also continued very positively. So we expect early in the autumn that discussion to be concluded. And then in the course of the autumn onwards, you'll see the first amounts of money coming in, the first reforms being implemented. The idea is the whole package is essentially implemented through to 2027, which is not far away at all.
Absolutely not. The EU and you as an ambassador have put emphasis on the need of reforms in the rule of law constantly in all reports, in all your statements during these years. Would the dissolution of the Judicial Council and the Council of Public Prosecutors be something that will worry the European Union, or will it be perceived as a demonstration of the willingness of the government to start fresh, brand new, to make huge reforms in this sector?
Actually, much more important than what I say is that if you speak to almost anybody in the country, they will tell you that reform of the rule of law is really important. They're very frustrated by the lack of progress, and they pollsters point to the very, very low confidence that citizens have in judges and in prosecutors. And I completely understand that following the election, there should be a real desire for significant radical action to address the rule of law. But what's important, I think, is that a certain amount has already been achieved. We're not starting from nothing. And I don't think we should be in a position where we simply sort of wipe clean the slate and start again. It sounds attractive, but actually it doesn't achieve the goal that we want, which is to see real improvements in the rule of law. So what we need to do is build on what has been achieved already. So, for example, with the Judicial Council, we were very concerned about what was happening in the Judicial Council last year. And we sent out a group of experts, peer review, which means other judges from EU member states, who prepared a report with some 40 recommendations which need to be implemented. So what we say is build on these recommendations in carrying out reform. You can be ambitious on reform, but we need to build on it. And it's not just the job of the government either. It's also the job of prosecutors and of the judges themselves and of lawyers. So it needs to be a joint effort. It's tempting just to try and wipe the slate clean, but it's also important that when you're trying to reform an area of such as the rule of law, you don't breach fundamental principles such as the separation of powers. Because in the end, what we're trying to do, I think what we're all trying to do, is make sure that there is a judiciary and a prosecution which is independent, professional, and has a high level of integrity.
I'm sure you have raised these concerns with the government. The EU is expecting the fight against corruption to also be higher on the agenda of the new government, of every government actually in the past 30 years. There are ideas, current ideas about how to do this. One comes from a political party that now went into opposition about the vetting of all public holders of public offices. Have you discussed maybe this kind of ideas in the EU? Do you think that that's a good way to move forward, or do you think that the current institutions and the current processes can be used for effective fight against corruption in Macedonia?
On the issue of corruption, again, it's citizens that are driving. The desire to see a reduction in corruption is across the board because it's so widespread and it exists at every single level. And of course, it's a major priority for the EU as well. It's part of an accession negotiation, and without making progress on corruption, it's not possible to join the European Union. So we're very, very invested in seeing reforms. What's good is virtually all the parties during the election talked about corruption, and all of them said that action needs to be done. So we welcome steps to tackle corruption. We look forward to seeing the proposals that come from the government. We're ready to provide expertise, best practice, good examples of how to achieve this. We're really ready to work with them. The government needs to lead, but it's not the only player here. Parliament has a really important role to play here. It's important that they actively engage. They take the reports from the State Audit Office, look at them and question. That's their role. It's important that the courts and the prosecutors should be active, challenging, bringing cases to court where there is evidence of corruption. And it's important that business and civil society should be part of it. So yes, government must lead, but it needs to be a joint effort. We will support everyone who is working on the fight against corruption because we really want to see results. And I think most of all, citizens really want to see results.
The suspension of the project for the construction of the railway to Bulgaria, a project that is funded with European money, has been announced in some way by the government. Is this project significant for the European Union? And is it possible that the government gets another deal for a project that connects the railway from north to south with the same conditions as for this railway to Bulgaria, because they say that it is much more important route for the Macedonian economy?
So in some ways this country is extremely fortunate because you have two major crossroads going through it. You have the crossroads which runs west to east, running, if you like, from Italy, the Adriatic, through Albania, North Macedonia, to Bulgaria and to the Black Sea. And then you have what you just said, the north-south corridor running up from Northern Europe, down through Hungary, Serbia, down into Greece. So really important routes for which the European Union have prioritized both of them. And they're part of what we call the Trans-European Network. We consider them both to be very important, and we are engaged on both of them in providing financial and technical support. For the railway corridor 8, the so-called west to east, which you've been talking about, we have already put in considerable investments. The government, new government, comes in, looks at the books, raises questions about it, and so we're having a very active discussion about how, not so much about the principle of it, because I think everyone agrees that this is actually also a very important corridor for the country, but more about implementation and execution. And we'll continue that discussion to see where we come out on that. On the corridor going north-south, we're already invested in that. It's not so well developed as the west-east corridor in terms of railway, but we're already invested in that, and we will be supporting, and we believe that that's also a priority. We believe ultimately there's not a question of choosing one or the other, that both can be supported over time, but of course we need to discuss together matters of implementation and execution. Both of those routes will be important for the economy of this country, for the economy of Europe, but also for security and prosperity.
Ambassador, as we mentioned at the beginning, you are finishing your mandate here. This will be probably your last or among your last interviews and public appearances in Macedonia. So at the end of this interview, I would like to ask you, what will be your fondest memory from your stay here in Skopje?
Gosh, that's hard to say because there are many really positive memories. Maybe not memories, but impressions, things that stay with me. And let me just name two things. One is, I just think every time when we go hiking in the mountains that this country is unbeatable. When you're up there, you're in nature, you have this incredible thing in this country where you have one mountain after another, and it just, as far as the eye can see, you see different rifts of mountains. It's staggering, beautiful. So I will miss that enormously, and I have fond memories of many, many hikes across the country. And the other is the conversations that I have with people, because as ambassador, I'm incredibly privileged. I get to meet many people, and probably the ones I've enjoyed most of all are the ones where we've been doing it across the country, we go to different towns, and at the end of the trip, we have an event in a cafe, and we sit down and citizens ask questions. And they're usually very smart questions, and I don't always have the answers, but it's always a really good exchange, and you learn a lot, and you come away and people, I think we both feel really happy to have had that discussion. I've learned, maybe some of the people have learned as well, and I think the feeling is that we've listened to each other, and that's just a great impression. So it's been a great privilege and an honor to be here. It's also been a joy, with some difficult moments too, I won't deny that.
You have to be honest about that. Yes,
Absolutely.
Ambassador, thank you so much, and we wish you luck in your next challenges.
And I wish you all the very best.
Thank you.